I took the job as a nanny because I needed the money and the hours fit perfectly with my schedule. The family seemed nice enough, a young couple with a little boy who was just starting school. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, and the pay was better than most of the other jobs I'd looked into. The wife, Emily, was friendly, if a little distant. She was always busy with work, but she made sure to check in with me each day, asking how her son was doing. The husband, Richard, was home more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was polite, always offering to help with things around the house, asking if I needed anything. But as the days went by, I started to notice that his attention was becoming a little too focused on me. It started with small things, a compliment here, a lingering glance there. He'd find excuses to be near me, whether it was in the kitchen while I was making lunch or in the living room when I was helping their son with his homework. I told myself it was just my imagination, that he was just being friendly. But the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. One evening, I was finishing up for the night. Emily was working late, and Richard was in his office, or at least that's what I thought. I had just put their son to bed and was getting ready to leave when I realized I had left my phone upstairs in the guest room where I kept my things. I headed up the stairs, the house eerily quiet in the darkness. When I reached the room, I felt a strange sensation, like something was off. I shook it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I walked to the bed, grabbed my phone, and was about to leave when I heard a soft rustling sound. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise was coming from the closet. At first, I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then I remembered that all the windows were closed. Slowly, I turned toward the closet door. It was closed, but I could hear faint movement coming from inside. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move, inching closer to the door. My hand trembled as I reached out and grabbed the handle. I hesitated for a moment, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave. But I had to know. I had to see what was inside. I yanked the door open, and there he was. Richard crouched inside, staring up at me with a sickening grin on his face. He didn't say a word, just kept smiling, like this was some kind of joke. My blood ran cold as I realized he had been hiding there, watching me. For a moment, I was too stunned to move. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened if I hadn't found him, if I had just gone to bed without knowing he was there. Then, the shock wore off, and fear took over. I bolted out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran down the stairs and out the front door, not stopping until I was halfway down the street. I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. I didn't care that I was making a scene. I just needed to get out of there. The police arrived quickly, and I explained what had happened. They took my statement and went to the house to question Richard. He denied everything, of course, saying it was just a misunderstanding, that he had been looking for something in the closet and didn't realize I was there. But I knew better. The way he had looked at me, the way he had been hiding in the dark, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was something far more sinister. I quit the job the next day and never looked back. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, knowing that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I still think about that night sometimes, about how close I came to finding out just what Richard was planning. The image of him crouched in that closet, grinning at me, is burned into my mind. I've never taken another job as a nanny, and I don't think I ever will. It was supposed to be an easy job, just a few hours of babysitting while the Andersons attended a dinner party. I'd done it plenty of times before. I watched over their two kids, Lucy and Ben, while they went out for the evening. The Andersons lived in a nice suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other and nothing ever happened. That night, though, something did happen, and it's something I'll never forget. The evening started off like any other. The kids had finished their dinner, and I let them play in the backyard while I cleaned up the kitchen. The Andersons had a beautiful house with a large backyard, complete with a pool, a swing set, and a small garden. The kids loved swimming, so I let them take a dip in the pool before it got too late. After about an hour, I told them it was time to head inside, and we went through the routine of drying off, changing into pajamas, and settling down in the living room to watch a movie. Once the kids were tucked in, I went back downstairs to relax for a bit before their parents returned. I was flipping through channels on the TV when I heard a soft noise coming from the kitchen. It was faint, but enough to catch my attention. I muted the TV and listened closely. There it was again, a subtle creaking sound, like a door slowly opening. A wave of unease washed over me. I remembered that after we came inside from the pool, I'd been in a rush to get the kids ready for bed and had completely forgotten to lock the back door. I cursed myself under my breath, realizing that I had left the house, vulnerable. Trying to stay calm, I got up and walked toward the kitchen, telling myself that it was probably just the wind. As I entered the kitchen, my eyes immediately went to the back door. Sure enough, it was slightly open, swaying ever so slightly. My heart skipped a beat. I walked over to the door, my hands trembling as I pushed it shut and locked it. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that the door had simply blown open on its own. But as I turned to walk back to the living room, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. One of the patio chairs had been moved. It was now directly in front of the kitchen window, something I knew I hadn't done. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized someone had been standing there, watching. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do next. I didn't want to scare the kids, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the Andersons, telling them that something felt off and that I thought someone might have tried to get in. They assured me that they would come home right away and told me to get the kids and wait in the car. I hung up the phone and hurried upstairs to get Lucy and Ben. They were both half asleep, but I managed to get them up and out of bed without alarming them too much. I told them we were going to play a little game and that we needed to get to the car as quickly and quietly as possible. The kids, still groggy, followed my lead. Once we were all safely in the car, I locked the doors and started the engine. I kept the headlights off and drove slowly down the street, not wanting to draw any attention. My heart was pounding the entire time, my eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We drove around the block a few times until I saw the Andersons' car pull into the driveway. I parked behind them and hurried out with the kids. Mr. Anderson rushed over to us, asking if we were okay. I nodded, but my voice was shaky as I explained what had happened. After checking the house, the Andersons found no one inside, but they did notice the moved patio chair and the back door that I had forgotten to lock. They reassured me that everything was fine and thanked me for acting quickly, but I couldn't shake the fear that had taken hold of me. Looking back, I realize how close we came to something much worse happening that night. It was my fault for leaving the door unlocked, a simple mistake that could have had terrifying consequences. I made it safe, luckily, and so did the kids, but I'll never forget how that night could have ended differently. From that moment on, I've always double-checked every lock, every door, no matter how safe the neighborhood might seem. We had been searching for a house for months, and this one ticked all the boxes. A quiet street, a big yard for Lily to play in, and enough space for us to grow as a family. Moving in felt like the start of a new chapter, a place where we could finally settle down and build our future. Lily, our 4-year-old daughter, was just as excited as we were. She loved her new room, especially the big window that let in the morning light. We spent the first few days unpacking, getting everything in order, and trying to make the house feel like home. But not long after we moved in, Lily's behavior began to change. At first, it was subtle. She seemed more tired during the day and less interested in playing outside. We assumed it was just the stress of the move, but then she started waking up at odd hours of the night. We'd hear her moving around, sometimes talking softly to herself, but when we asked her about it in the morning, she didn't remember. We brushed it off as just a phase, something that would pass once she got used to her new surroundings. But then, one night, my wife heard a faint knocking sound coming from Lily's room. She went in to check on her and found Lily standing by the wall, her tiny hand tapping softly against it. When my wife asked her what she was doing, Lily simply said, "I'm knocking for my friend." She didn't elaborate, and when we asked her about it the next day, she seemed confused, like she didn't understand what we were talking about. This strange behavior continued, and it became a nightly occurrence. Lily would wake up, walk to the wall, and start knocking. The same soft, rhythmic knocks, always in the same spot. It was unsettling, but we tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe it was her way of dealing with the stress of the move. But as the days turned into weeks, my wife grew more and more concerned. That's when we decided to install security cameras in Lily's room. We wanted to make sure she was safe, and maybe, we thought, we could get some answers. I set up the cameras discreetly, not wanting to alarm her, and we started reviewing the footage each night. The first few nights, everything seemed normal. Lily would sleep soundly, and there was no sign of the strange behavior we had been witnessing. But then, around a week after we installed the cameras, we caught it. At exactly 3 a.m., Lily stirred in her bed. She sat up slowly, her movements almost robotic, and then climbed out of bed. She walked straight to the wall and began knocking, just like before. It was eerie to watch, the way she moved, the way she stood there for minutes on end, knocking softly. It sent chills down my spine. But what bothered me most was the look on her face. It was blank, almost as if she wasn't really there, just going through the motions. I tried talking to her about it, asking if she remembered anything, but she didn't, or at least, she said she didn't. I started to wonder if she was hiding something, but what could a 4-year-old possibly have to hide? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, after watching yet another video of Lily's strange nocturnal behavior, I decided to inspect the wall myself. I waited until she was asleep and quietly entered her room. I stood in front of the spot where she always knocked and tapped on the wall. It sounded solid, but I noticed something odd. A faint seam running along the baseboard, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. My heart began to race as I knelt down to get a closer look. Using a small tool, I carefully pried at the seam, and to my horror, the drywall gave way. Behind the wall was a narrow, hidden space. It was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and inside I found something that made my stomach turn. There were old, tattered sheets, a few scattered toys, and a faded photograph. The photograph was of a little girl, around the same age as Lily, staring blankly at the camera. But it wasn't just any photograph. It was of Lily. The same clothes, the same face. But this photo was old, worn around the edges, like it had been taken years ago. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized what this meant. Someone had been living in that space, watching Lily, possibly for a long time. And the photograph, how could it even exist? How could it show Lily from years ago, long before we had even moved into the house? I sealed the wall back up as quickly as I could, my hands trembling. I didn't tell my wife right away. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. But I knew one thing. We had to get out of that house, and fast. We moved out within a month, leaving behind whatever dark secrets that house held. I never spoke of what I found behind the wall, not to my wife, not to anyone. But the memory of those nights haunts me, especially when I see Lily playing in our new home. I can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her.